Hi, I'm Alex Barron with Digital Research here in San Francisco with the CEO and co-founder of Statwing, Greg Laughlin. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Greg Laughlin, CEO and co-founder of Statwing.
Okay, Statwing. Tell us, what does Statwing do?
Sure. So we make an easy-to-use data analysis tool, and it the explanation for what we do depends on where you're coming from. So if you're somebody who's used statistical analysis tools like SPSS or R or SAS or Stata, we're like a human-friendly version of those tools. So instead of being made by and for statisticians, we're made by analysts for analysts, people who are not PhDs in statistics. So these are folks who have some sort of familiarity with running statistical analysis, but don't really need the full extent of a huge, massive tool like those. So for half of our audience, that's what we do. The other half of our audience thinks of us as an upgrade from Excel pivot tables. So they're folks who are doing lots of analysis. Maybe they don't normally need to do statistical analysis, and they have a survey where they do need that kind of analysis, or maybe they're just trying to kind of step up their analysis game, and then they would move over to us. So the same kind of functionality that you might use Excel pivot tables for. And versus both of those, we're much faster, much more efficient. You can just think sort of a modern version of those kinds of tools.
Okay, perfect. So you mentioned survey stats. What other kind of statistics do you work with?
Sure. So the glory and the pain of having a horizontally useful data analysis tool is that we're useful across a lot of different kinds of applications. So one of our core applications is survey data analysis, and that's really perfect for us. Another really common use case is that business analysts or maybe marketing analysts or just product managers or somebody within a larger enterprise will pull data via SQL query or from a BI tool, pull data from some data warehouse or from some large repository of data and need to analyze it. And instead of dropping it into Excel or R, they'll drop it into Statwing. And so again, that is sort of a broad use case because that's just any data that business has. But often we see things like the effectiveness of a social media campaign, which of these posts with what characteristics or how successful, or probably the most common use case we see in that kind of situation is looking at something like product churn. So maybe you would look at a BI tool like Tableau or ClickView and say, how many of my users have churned in the last month in a certain geography, sort of the what question. We would be the why question, pulling it out and saying, why did they churn? So now I've got a data set of all my customers, whether they churned or not, and various demographic characteristics. So is it certain types of behaviors that lead them to churn, certain types of customers that are churning, asking those kind of bigger, deeper questions and diving into that. So those are probably the two biggest chunks of users, folks pulling from SQL queries or BI tools, and folks doing survey data analysis.
Okay, and then you integrate with all these BI tools, I assume?
So we don't actually integrate directly in them because almost all of them have functionality where you can spit out a CSV, and then getting a CSV into us is trivially easy. It's just kind of quickly upload it or copy paste, drag and drop, what have you, and it's pretty straightforward to get started there. And Statwing's pretty intelligent about understanding the structure of the data. So these are a column of times, or this is a column of numbers, or what have you. And that sort of understanding of how the data is structured is a big piece of how we're able to make that process a lot more efficient, because it turns out that analysts spend a lot of time thinking, even just sort of implicitly, okay, here's how my data is structured. This column of data is binary. It's either a 1 or a 0, and this column of data is a bunch of numbers, and how do I best analyze the relationship between those two columns? There's a lot of that thinking that's based on the structure of the data that we sort of abstract into the software so that they don't really have to worry about that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. So are there any success stories that really stand out in any companies that you can mention as customers?
Yeah, my favorite, I can't actually use their name explicitly, but I can say they're one of the big 4 audit companies. So they're a large company that you would have heard of. And they use this for actually the exact application I was just talking about before. There was sort of a product group within one of them that was looking at all their different customers, whether they churned, and they gathered a bunch of data on how many touches those customers had, whether they had attended certain conferences, and a dozen other kinds of behaviors or demographic characteristics. And one of the nice things you can do in Statwing is say, hey, I'm interested in a lot of relationships. I'm interested in the relationship between churn and all those things I just mentioned. And where in, say, Excel or SPSS, you would sort of painstakingly one by one say, hey, I want to understand the relationship between churn and conference attendance. churn and how many touches they got. Churn in each of those is going to take 10, 20, 30 minutes. You can, with us, with just a few clicks, say, hey, I want to know the relationship between this and everything else. Click a few buttons and we'll stack rank the importance of all these and say, hey, here's what's actually driving churn. So you can get that kind of analysis done both really quickly and in sort of a self-serve fashion. So the folks who were using us at this company were not statisticians by any means. They were product managers using us on their own data and able to get those kind of results in a way that typically you'd have to outsource to somebody else if you're able to do it at all.
Okay, so you mentioned product managers might be a typical user. So imagine you're a product manager and you have a bunch of data that you need to analyze. How quickly can a product manager get up to speed in Statwing and start analyzing that data?
So we have a 2-minute introductory video that we have found is about all we need to really get people started. We'll check in with folks afterwards and say, hey, can we do anything more to help? And then, no, we're good. We got this covered. So, we're working on more videos for more use cases and more sort of extra bells and whistles. But it honestly takes that 2-minute video to get the basics of it. And then from there, sure, you're discovering more things for the rest of the day as you use it, but you've got a pretty solid understanding of how it works and how you're getting value out of it in 10 minutes.
Okay, good stuff. Now, obviously there are some competitors on the market. How does Statwing differentiate from these other companies?
I really love that question because it's hard to sort of imagine in your head, but if I were to show you on the computer screen what it's like to analyze data like this in an old school statistical software package like SPSS or IBM, it sort of looks like you're in DOS or something like that. It's kind of kludgy, takes a little work to get things done if you know how to do it. And if you don't have the statistical expertise you need, you're going to really struggle to get it done. So it's about that ease of use and the efficiency, even if you do know how to do something. So we open up this whole set of statistical analyses, this whole way of looking at data and thinking about these questions to an audience that was never going to use it before. That product manager we're talking about was never going to pull out SPSS or R or something like that. And then for those folks who are already comfortable in those tools, it's just much faster. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody who does institutional research at an academic institution, and he said, in order to prove to people around me the value of Statwing, I did it in SPSS and I did it in Statwing, and I counted it, and it took 4 times as long to do it in SPSS. So that kind of efficiency for those folks who do know what they're doing is pretty exciting for us.
Okay, sure. Now let's change gears a little bit, and I'd love to know about what you were doing before Statwing.
Sure. So my co-founder and I met each other as a product manager, myself, and engineer and data scientist for him, John, when we were at a company called Crowdflower. Crowdflower does microtask engineering. So if you're familiar with Amazon's Mechanical Turk, they are sort of, you could think of them as formerly at least having been a competitor of theirs. They used to work together as well. But before that, I was a consultant where I helped foundations like the Gates Foundation, Packard Foundation, etc., use data analysis to further their strategic aims and to understand the success. Understand the success of their programs and initiatives. And so that was a job where 2 things were important. One was translating statistical findings into common language that anybody can understand, and 2 was using this old school software, using SPSS. And so during that time, I found this is just way too painful. This is clearly built for statisticians. This isn't built for analysts. This isn't built for people who don't have years of experience doing this sort of thing. When I came to Crowdflower and I met my co-founder, John, I had been doing survey data analysis, which is not super hard. It's not the very high end of data analysis. He had been doing artificial intelligence work, machine learning, using R, the fanciest tools. And he also sort of had a lot of the same pain points as me. He said, okay, I'm dropping down from R into Excel, and it feels like just this huge step backwards. And R is great. It's very powerful, and you can do almost anything you'd ever want, but it makes it a little tricky and a little kludgy to do sort of the basics. So we figured we have these same kinds of pain points, just this kind of kludginess. These tools aren't really meant for modern use cases. Let's see if that's something we can fix together. Because if we both have this problem, a lot of other people have this problem.
Okay. So you have this idea, you find the company. What were the early days like?
Oh man, a lot of work, I think. That's one of the more obvious answers you'll probably hear. But I think, as Paul Graham said to us, the founder of Y Combinator, he said, SPSS was not built in a day. This is going to take you guys a while. And we knew that, actually the first time we got coffee and talked about this idea. It's not the kind of product where you can ship an MVP that you worked on for a month and it's going to knock people's socks off, because it's nothing, in a way, there's nothing innovative about the overall goal of what we're doing. What's innovative about what we're doing is the way we get there, the design and so forth. So the early days was a lot of pounding away, saying we know it's going to take us a long time before we have validation. And I think that's something that folks should always keep in mind, depending on what product they're starting. Is this something I can get validation on quickly or not? And I don't think, I think there's maybe sort of something in the air or an ethos that you shouldn't do anything that you can't get really quick validation on. And I think you probably are better off doing stuff where you can get quick validation, but it doesn't mean there aren't plenty of things where there's no way to get that validation for a couple of years.
Yeah, sure. I think the message should be, ideally you get that validation, but there's just a lot of companies and a lot of products that it's just impossible to get that validation so quickly.
Absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. So what was it like getting that first customer and that first validation?
That's a good question. I think we're not the types to be terribly satisfied, so I barely remember it. I think I remember us saying we made our first dollar at some point, but I barely even remember it. I'm trying to think of what kind of milestone like that actually did stand out for us. It was probably, not to be too specific, but the first month where we doubled our revenue, or said, okay, this is something, this is actually happening, and not from a super large number to begin with, but when you see like that kind of meaningful growth, okay, there's something here.
Okay, sure. And then prior to that, I assume you had the validation of getting into Y Combinator, which is obviously a big one at the start.
That's true. That was very. It felt like this is our shot. It felt like, okay, if we can't pull it off, we were given all the opportunity in the world. So now it's 100% on us. There's no complaining in the future. We've had so many great opportunities, and we're incredibly lucky to be a part of that community. And it is really an incredible community of folks who, Paul Graham has sort of moved away from day-to-day running the thing, and now Sam Altman does that. But I definitely still get an email now and again from Paul saying, "Oh, did you think about this?" So it's really an amazing community of folks that we're lucky to be a part of.
Okay, excellent. Now, you already mentioned the whole validation thing about how ideally you want to get that validation, but do you have any other advice for startup founders?
Yeah, I think probably one or two pieces. We'll see how this answer comes out. The largest is that everybody's advice is basically more or less what happened to them. You talk to somebody successful, and what they advise you to do is what they did because it worked for them. And that's a reasonable human bias to have, but I think as we've sort of found that to be true, and even when that isn't true, it's taken us a while to realize that nobody is even close to being in your business like you are in your business. So it doesn't matter if Paul Graham tells you something. If you really think he's wrong, then you sort of just has to go forward on your own. This was a bit of advice that Jeff Ralston, formerly of Lala, who's also a YC partner, said in some interview as well. He said the number one problem with the YC companies I work with is they don't listen to my advice, and the number two problem is that they listen to my advice too much. So that's what I would encourage people to do, to get both of those wrong somehow.
Okay, yeah, and that seems to be a theme recently amongst CEOs in Silicon Valley, is the whole non-advice advice and trusting your own instincts, and like having confidence in the fact that this is your company, you understand it better than anybody else. And just because somebody was successful in something else doesn't mean that they know how to be successful with your business.
Yeah, there's just so much context from the day-to-day of thinking about this stuff all the time that you just can't give somebody else that can't give back to you.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Now we should probably wrap up soon, but two final questions. One, what's next for Statwing?
What's next for Statwing is always an exciting question for us, because sometimes we know, and sometimes we think we know, and it's not quite true, because we're very willing to sort of follow our customers where they tell us to go. But the thing we're most focused on right now is selling to larger enterprises. And those folks, I think what we're most excited about working with them on is expanding from exactly where we are right now, where we're taking this analysis process and making that really simple, and sort of moving upstream a little bit to actually connect more into their databases, to have sort of a SQL-based GUI for being able to allow normal business users to query data in the same way we're allowing normal business users to do the analysis themselves. We look around and there seems to us at least to be sort of a surprising amount of room for somebody to come in and do a really well-designed implementation of that problem.
Okay, fair enough. Now, last question. Where can people go to learn more about Statwing and potentially even try out the product?
Great, statwing.com. There's a 1-week free trial. There's nothing like getting your hands on it, getting your hands dirty a little bit, finding out what this is actually all about. And I always feel a little bad that when I talk about Statwing, I say, oh, it's so easy to use. Well, everybody says their thing is easy to use, but really it's easy to use. So if you go to statwing.com, there's a little button to try a demo just with our data. Click around, get a feel of that. If that's compelling enough, you can then sign up for 1-week free trial, upload your own data. 5-10 minutes later, you'll know if it's good for you or not.
All right, well, thank you very much, Greg, and best of luck.
Great, thank you.